We need to talk about how the Supreme Court heard arguments yesterday that could land thousands of ballots in the garbage in the next election and just get Trump one step closer to ending mail-in voting. And all of this is going down while he seemed to be pretty resistant to letting up on the SAVE Act as airport lines spill out the door. Because, you see, during the pandemic, Mississippi passed a law that allowed a 5-day grace period for mail-in ballots as long as they were postmarked by Election Day. But the right, they pushed back on that with the Republican National Committee and the Mississippi Republican Party filing a lawsuit to invalidate it. In the Fifth Circuit Court, they decided that the ballots must be filed and received by Election Day, shooting down the mail-in grace period. And so then we fast forward from that, and in oral arguments before the Supreme Court, you had Mississippi Solicitor General Scott Stewart arguing against the ruling.
The Fifth Circuit was wrong to rule otherwise. This court should reverse.
Left-leaning justices like Ketanji Brown Jackson seem to argue in support of keeping the grace period as well.
The day fixed for the election of the president, end quote, that's the day on which the electors will vote and transmit their votes, and that the president of the Senate would receive their votes at a later date. So this concept of casting one's vote versus the receipt of the vote was very early on distinguished. And this demonstrates that whether you call it 2 elections or not, the casting of the votes can happen temporally, separately from the receiving of the votes.
But then you had the justices on the right seeming poised to uphold the lower court's decision, calling out what they saw as contradictions in Stewart's arguments and questioning how the grace period could undermine confidence in election integrity. But then also you had people like Paul Clement who argued in favor of cutting the grace period, facing questions around states' rights in voting. Or Liberal Justice Kagan saying that ballot receipt deadlines were something that was a state function, saying that Congress wrote the statutes this way where, with respect to all elections, the states were setting their own receipt deadlines. And you had some of the other left-leaning justices seeming to agree.
Because it seems to me that we have a very long history of states having a variety of different ballot receipt deadlines to include after Election Day.
However, you're seeing people not too sure that those arguments were enough to save the law. And the stakes here, they are very high. There are at least 28 other states in DC that have similar laws. And that includes battleground states like Nevada. So you have people worried about how this could upend mail-in voting on a national level. And at least until early June, we don't know which way it's gonna go, which, by the way, that is less than 6 months away from a midterm election that feels like life or death for the Democrats. Right? And with all this, you have defenders of the voting grace period saying, this case is about whether millions of voters will be disenfranchised through no fault of their own, saying that this would toss away valid ballots cast by eligible voters for no other reason than the U.S. Postal Service failed to deliver them by Election Day, something that is often entirely out of the voters' control. But then also you have people like Republican National Committee Chairman Joe Gruters saying elections must end on Election Day, which is why the RNC led the way in challenging this harmful state law. And some Republicans have also said this prevents elections from dragging on for days and weeks after voters have cast their ballots, causing confusion and undermining our elections. But that's also pretty hard to take from the party whose leader has been peddling voter fraud conspiracies for the better part of a decade and also still mail-in voting.
And it's time that the Republicans get tough and stop it, because the Democrats want it. It's the only way they can get elected. Because with men and women's sports and with transgender for everybody and open borders and all of the horrible things, and now the new thing is they love crime.
Right, and Trump's been known to reject mail-in voting for seemingly made-up reasons.
You can never have a real democracy with mail-in ballots. And we, as a Republican Party, are going to do everything possible that we get rid of mail-in ballots. It's so corrupt, where some people get 5, 6, 7 ballots delivered to them.
And of course, all of this, it's connected to just his obsession with losing the 2020 election. But all of this, again, as you have the Washington Post reporting that he mailed his ballot for Florida's special election between Emily Gregory and John Maples today. And that's not an outlier thing. He also mailed his ballot back in 2020, which also leaves a weird trail for a man so adamant about the dangers that he sees in mail-in voting.
Brought to my attention today that we're the only country that does mail-in voting. Mail-in voting means mail-in cheating. I call it mail-in cheating.
But also, notably, this comes as Trump was previously trying to strong-arm the SAVE Act through Congress, at one point even refusing to budge on deals that could end the chaos in airports until Congress passes it.
And I'm suggesting strongly to the Republican Party, don't make any deal on anything. The most important thing we can have is what's called the Save America Act. Don't make any deal on anything unless you include voter ID, and you have to be a citizen to vote. The Democrats are fully to blame with the struggle of the great American public is going through at the airports. They're going through a big struggle right now.
So this is just, it's part of a concerted effort to make voting more difficult on really all fronts. Whether it's under the guise of this imaginary voter fraud thing or the idea that we'll somehow find a batch of ballots that overturns an election after a winner is announced, this really all seems more like a play against free elections than anything else. And then on top of this, of course, we're still wondering if we're gonna have to worry about ICE agents moving from the airports to the polls when the time comes as well.